Ijeoma Oluo is the author of So You Want to Talk About Race. She joins me now, live, for further analysis. Thanks really so much for being with us. You know, a lot of people in the United States and around the world have found these protests very inspirational. But in the U.S., I feel like we have been here before. I know people say it really is different this time, but when full institutional change is what's required to try to correct the issues, and we can't even revise the Second Amendment, I mean, how inspired are you to believe that real institutional change can actually come from this?
I think that we have a rare level of opportunity right now. I am not about to say that this is it, the world is going to be forever different. But I do think that we have real opportunity to see test cases of what institutional change looks like on local levels. So, looking at what's happening in Minneapolis, New York, and Los Angeles, is very inspiring, but it's also a really great place to start experimenting and running test cases. We have been calling for not only reform, but for defunding of police for a very long time. And this is really our first chance to work at it and see if we can make this happen. So I am inspired that we can learn, that we can grow, and we can find a way to bring this about nationally. I don't think that we're going to wake up next month to a different country.
Okay. I want to talk about the issue of defunding the police, something a lot of the protesters have called for, and they'll be happy to see then what's happening in Minneapolis. But some say you're treading in very dangerous territory here. You're effectively throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. Do you see any potential dangers there? Because a lot of our communities need the police to keep them safe. Now, there are, of course, very bad police officers that do abuse their power, as we've seen time and time again. But again, the throwing out the baby with the bathwater comes into play here. Don't the police just need reform instead of defunding?
I think what we've seen time and time again is that reform really doesn't work. Systemic racism and abuse is so ingrained throughout the force. Our police force has for so long been so heavily militarized that that sort of cultural change, along with changing laws, is just really not possible. We've tried time and time again, and we're continuing to see high levels of abuse across the country, especially towards Black and Indigenous people. Defunding doesn't mean that tomorrow there are no police. What it means is that we start looking at what should law enforcement be about? Should our police officers be mental health counselors? Should they be social workers, right? Should they be, resolving minor disputes? These are things that we need to say, you know what, people are dying in these encounters. Let's take money away from this area and put it towards community resources. And let's take money away from prosecuting people for low-level offenses and put it towards community building, towards jobs, and towards things that actually reduce crime.
Okay. The issue, though, still, though, with racism in the United States, I mean, how ingrained, how embedded is it? Because when you talk about race, I mean, there's so much nuance to it in a way that people who lack empathy really won't be able to understand. And there are a lot of those people. And they're just going to sit there and say, minorities have a chip on their shoulder. You know, things have gotten so much better in this country. And they just want to complain and they want to go back, 300 years. And that's not really the case. I mean, there just will be people who want to feel superior and will feel that they are kind of entitled to be superior. And I'm wondering, how do you go about trying to change that mentality, especially when it runs even among the ranks of federal leadership in America today?
I think that we need to have honest conversations, not only about the way our police forces are acting now towards populations of color, but about the way they've always acted. The truth is that our police forces got their start in slave patrols. Their job was to return people back to slavery. Their relationship with Black people and Indigenous people in this country has always been very different from that of white people. So it can be very hard if you're a white person who has always looked up to police, to realize that, oh, you mean they treat this whole other segment of the population completely differently? But they always have. As a Black person, I am 3 to 4 times more likely to die in an encounter with police, and I am more likely to encounter violence, even though I am less likely to be armed or have any contraband on me. And that is the reality of my life. The first time I ever got pulled over at 16, I went to reach for my registration, and a cop put his hand on his gun and said, "That's a good way to get shot." Now, who looks at a 16-year-old kid who just got her license and thinks she's reaching for a gun in this suburb? But that's what happened to me the very first time I ever got pulled over. And he wanted me to thank him for telling me that if I reached for my glove compartment, I could get shot. That's the reality of how Black people and Indigenous people are policed in this country.
Ijeoma Oluo, thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it.